Picture this for a moment. The year is 1935. The leaders of the Third Reich are standing on a podium, passionately lecturing the crowd about the greatness of pure Aryan blood. Now imagine that at this exact moment, someone hands each of them the results of a modern DNA test. You know, the standard spit tube test any of us can order today to find out about our ancestry. What would happen? Spoiler alert, their grandiose ideology, which cost the world tens of millions of lives, would have collapsed that very day, right on that same podium. Today we're going to look through the microscope and dismantle the most terrifying myth of the 20th century. We'll find out why modern genetics is Nazism's worst enemy, how science permanently destroyed the concept of race, and most importantly, what shocking absolute bombshell of a secret was hiding in the DNA of Adolf Hitler's own relatives. Get comfortable, because this scientific investigation is going to completely flip your understanding of history. To grasp the sheer scale of the absurdity, let's go back to a time when no one even had a clue about DNA. The entire Nazi empire rested on one fundamental yet entirely false idea, the myth of the pure Aryan race. The Nazis genuinely believed that there was some ideal biological species of humans, tall, blonde, blue-eyed supermen, whose blood supposedly hadn't mixed with other nations for millennia. But how did they measure this purity without any understanding of genetics? The answer is shockingly primitive. With a ruler and a pair of metal calipers, they turned science into an instrument of hate. An entire pseudo-scientific industry was created, so-called racial hygiene and eugenics. Reich scientists literally measured skull proportions, nose width, and the distance between the eyes. They created special charts for hair and eye colors. People were issued an Ahnen pass, an ancestor passport that verified their origins based solely on church records of their grandparents. In other words, a person's fate, their very right to live or die, was determined by entries in dusty old books and cold metal calipers. The Nazis fervently believed that character traits, intelligence levels, loyalty to the state, and even criminal tendencies were passed down through some mythical blood. There was only one problem. All of this was absolute, 100% anti-scientific nonsense. They ignored the actual laws of biology and relied exclusively on visual stereotypes and their own sick fantasies. Nazi eugenics wasn't a science. It was a deadly cult trying to force nature to fit its political slogans. And as soon as humanity was able to look inside the human cell and sequence the genome, this cult crumbled to dust. Because what scientists saw in our DNA forever changed the understanding of who we truly are. So, what exactly did scientists see when they finally fully sequenced the human genome in the early 2000s? They saw a history that completely dismantles Nazi ideology. The main conclusion from geneticists sounded like a death sentence for any form of racism. From a biological standpoint, the concept of a pure race simply does not exist in nature. Let's break down where modern Europeans actually came from, including those very Germans whom the leadership of the Third Reich considered the absolute crown of evolution. If we look at our DNA, we'll see that every single one of us is an incredibly complex genetic cocktail. All humans on the planet descend from a common group of ancestors who migrated out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago. But the most interesting part concerns Europe specifically. For a long time, there was a myth that Europeans were some unique population that had lived there since the dawn of time, never mixing with anyone else. But the analysis of ancient DNA extracted from the bones of early humans revealed a shocking truth. The genome of a modern European is made up of at least 3 completely distinct, massive waves of migration. The first were dark-skinned, blue-eyed hunter-gatherers. Then, about 8,000 years ago, They were joined by farmers from the Middle East. Yes, from the territories of modern-day Syria, Turkey, and Iraq. They brought with them lighter skin and agriculture. And even later, a third wave swept over Europe. Fierce nomads from the eastern steppes, known as the Yamnaya culture. So, when the Nazis were fanatically searching for pure-blooded Germans, they were actually chasing ghosts. It is biologically impossible to find a person whose ancestors lived in absolute isolation in the center of Europe for millennia. Every German, just like every French or British person, carries the genes of Middle Eastern farmers and Asian nomads. The mixing of blood isn't pollution, as Nazi propaganda screamed. It is the fundamental mechanism of survival and evolution for our species. But what about the infamous Aryans? Here, modern science puts the final nail in the coffin. Genetics, combined with linguistics and archaeology, has proven that the Aryans never existed as a biological race. Historically, the term Aryan refers exclusively to a linguistic group, ancient Indo-Iranian tribes. Ascribing genetic uniqueness to them, let alone projecting that onto the inhabitants of Northern Europe, is like assuming everyone who speaks English is a direct genetic descendant of Queen Victoria. It's simply scientific absurdity. The Nazis spent millions trying to prove their biological superiority. They established entire institutes in an attempt to find that one unique master gene. But if they had had access to modern DNA analysis technologies, they would have seen something that would have popped their ideology like a soap bubble. And nothing proves this better than one specific story. The story of how, in 2010, researchers got their hands on the holy grail of Reich ideologists, the DNA of Adolf Hitler's own relatives. And what they found there became the ultimate historical trolling by Mother Nature herself. In 2010, a journalist named Jean-Paul Mulders and a historian named Mark Vermeeren embarked on an unprecedented investigation. They decided to do what the Nazis themselves never could: look into the actual DNA of the Führer's bloodline. They spent months tracking down 39 living relatives of Adolf Hitler. These included cousins hiding in plain sight in rural Austria, and even his great-nephews living a quiet, anonymous life on Long Island, New York. The researchers collected saliva samples, some willingly given, others carefully gathered from discarded napkins or cigarette butts, and sent them to a specialized genetic laboratory. They were specifically looking at the Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed down directly from father to son. When the lab results came back, the researchers were absolutely stunned. The DNA of Hitler's relatives belonged to a specific chromosomal haplogroup known as E1b1b1. Why is this an absolute bombshell? Because haplogroup E1b1b1 is incredibly rare in Germany and Western Europe. In fact, it is almost non-existent among the so-called pure Germanic populations. You know where it is common, though? It is one of the foundational genetic lineages among the Berbers of North Africa, and even more devastating to the entire Nazi worldview. This exact same genetic marker is heavily present among Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. Let that sink in for a moment. The man who built a tyrannical empire on the obsessive, murderous pursuit of Aryan purity, the man who orchestrated the darkest atrocities in history to eradicate the Jewish people, genetically belonged to the very groups he was trying to wipe off the face of the earth. According to the twisted pseudo-scientific Nuremberg laws of his own Third Reich, Hitler's own DNA would have made him a target of his own regime. It is, without a doubt, the ultimate cosmic irony of the 20th century. Modern genetics didn't just expose Hitler's hypocrisy, it permanently buried the foundation of his ideology. The DNA inside our cells tells a fascinating story of migration, survival, and endless mixing. It proves that the concept of biological race is nothing but a social construct invented to divide us. Science shows us that we are all vastly more interconnected than we could ever imagine. Our genetic code is not a weapon of supremacy, it is a beautifully complex map of our shared human journey. So, I have a question for you. Have you ever taken a DNA ancestry test? Did you discover any shocking regions or unexpected origins in your own bloodline? Share your stories down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this scientific deep dive into history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an investigation.